my land, take me where I cannot stand. I don't care, I'm still free. You can't take the sky from me.
God, you've had to watch Heart of Gold 3 times in a week?
Actually, I think I only watched Heart of Gold twice. And it was the first time was like 10 days ago.
That's a wise decision. Guys, you're listening to the Real World Podcast, and I've just taken Mike by surprise by just starting the podcast. We were just talking for realsies, and now we're in the show. This is your All Things Firefly podcast for another couple of weeks anyway. Firefly now, Serenity later. We will do something else afterwards. But for now, we are still talking Firefly. I'm still Matt Waters. He's still Mike Thomas. And the first thing we're going to do, as we always do, every single week, you can't prove otherwise, we're going to roll into corrections and clarifications. Thankfully, people who pay more attention than us listen to this podcast on a regular basis and let me know when we say things that are not true. So if the jury will allow it, I'm going to say some of those now. So they did, in fact, create a second Saffron episode entirely because Christina Hendricks was so good. The 3 unaired episodes, Heart of Gold, Trash, and The Message, they were shot after all the other ones, and they did, in fact, just entirely create a new episode on the strength of her performance in the show. So my instinct of that's what it felt like was correct. They probably had some sort of heist-type caper in mind, and they retooled it to fit her into it, but... yeah, there you go.
See, that's annoying to me because it reinforces the, this feels right type of internet writing, thinking, pontificating as being at all valid whatsoever. So now I have to tolerate you when you say such things going forward solely based on this one little factoid.
Hey man, I've got a sense for these things. I know this industry. There's someone listening right now who's pissed at me. Another thing that I didn't know this, so this isn't something that we got wrong. It's just a fun little factoid about Trash. The thing they were going to steal, originally not a priceless gun, it was going to be a Beatles album, but they couldn't get the rights for it. It is a heavy rumour, so that's kind of cool. I don't know. Nathan Fillion, while naked in the desert at the end, allegedly wore a picture of Joss Whedon over his private area to cover his modesty. And also that little tattoo he has is real, and he regrets it. So there you go. Those are some things that we failed to mention about Trash. So enough of that. Let's stop living in the past, and let's live in the present, where I can continue to feel things and get vibes about stuff, and Mike has to just live with it. We're going to be talking about The Message, and we're going to be talking about everyone's favourite episode in the whole wide world, Heart of Gold. Mike, how do you feel about having to tackle these two right now as a combo, as a 1-2 punch?
I have a lot of conflicted feelings. It's actually interesting. I think, Matt, you did correctly predict after weeks of failing to predict. The Message was my favorite episode years ago when the first few times I'd watched through the show, and Heart of Gold was my least favorite episode. So It was kind of interesting now to go back into them, watching them, with one being at my top of my list, one being at the very bottom of the list. After now viewing them multiple times in the past 10 days, Heart of Gold is still by far my least favorite episode.
Yep.
To the point where I'd say there's virtually nothing redeeming about it, which I thought now, going back through it this time, I was like, well, I'm sure I'll find a few things to like about it.
Wow.
But really, I don't think there's really anything. Maybe we'll find some through our conversation.
Yeah, challenge accepted for half an hour from now.
Yes. The Message, on the other hand, I would say it's not that I dislike it now. It's more just that I feel a much stronger connection to many other episodes now at this point. And I would actually say The Message probably wouldn't even be in my top half.
Whoa.
But as we discussed recently, the top half of Firefly episode is kind of a hard list to crack, just because almost every episode you're like, well, that's got to be in the top half. That's got to be in the top half.
Yeah.
And I feel like my instinct now is that this would not make my top half, although it has a number of moments that I do truly love.
Oh, yeah.
But so that, I think that was kind of interesting just to see how my mind had changed on one and not so much on the other. And the other thing, I guess just broadly speaking, is that The Message is this weird episode where I think a common thing we've run into is that we kept going, well, this would be a great episode if there was a payoff down the line. This would be a great episode if there was more. This would be a great episode if there was more, or something like that. This thread would be more satisfying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the message actually benefits due to the fact that Firefly is essentially just a miniseries.
Yeah. It's one of the most self-contained episodes they do.
It's very self-contained. 2, I think it's the type of plot that would feel very unearned in like a 200 episode run. Like if you just like this, because like this Tracy character clearly, was worth more than 20 minutes of screen time in one episode. Like he, this probably should have been like a mythology building character. Like this is how you expand the universe in a way. But when there is only about 16 hours of footage, only getting one episode of Tracy makes a lot more sense, even if it was unintentional. So this is one of those weird episodes that benefits from the unfortunately short run of Firefly.
Sure. I actually had very little memory of this episode. When Tracy sort of grabbed Kaylee, I was like, oh, this. But before that, this one it just kind of slipped from my mind, and that's negligent. That's not like me. I kind of generally remember. If I've seen it, I generally remember it, but this one was just kind of gone. So this one really took me by surprise in a way. So I don't have a similar experience as you, where it sort of slipped down in my estimations. If anything, it went up because I had no expectation. But then Heart of Gold, we'll talk about it. For now, though, let's devote most of our time to talking about the message. Episode 12, as Joss Whedon intended it, never aired on television because Fox cancelled the show, and that is actually going to be quite relevant to this episode. Written by Joss Whedon himself and Tim Minear, directed by Tim Minear. So Mal and Zoe get a package, and it's basically a box with a dead body in it of a guy called Tracy, who served with them in the war. There's an audio recording on his person that is asking them to take him back to his parents, give him a nice funeral, etc. A Fed named Womack shows up and is basically causing bad times for anyone who's been on the trail of this, and he wants it back. Basically, it turns out Tracy is full of artificial organs. Oh, also, he's still alive, and he took a drug to make it look like he's dead, and he's basically just trying to get himself out of a bind, and he's manipulating Mal and Zoe's sort of sense of duty and what is right to get him where he needs to go. Tracy basically doesn't believe that they will do right by him, so he pulls a gun on Kaylee and starts a big shootout with people. Book eventually talks Womack into abandoning it. Tracy has already taken a shot and just dies apologetically, but they take him back to his family anyway. And I guess that sounds kind of a high concept thing to do in the space of 40 minutes. I think it's paced pretty well, actually. It fits a shocking amount. It reminds me of the pilot in that way, even though that had twice the amount of time to play with. They have time for some sillier little moments and some character stuff, and they're introducing a whole new character, and there's flashbacks, and there's a resolution that doesn't feel rushed, I don't think, and an interesting antagonist, or not interesting, but he's better than just Monster of the Week or whatever. So yeah, I commend it for that. I think it does fit an awful lot in to the length of a normal episode. And for me, again, it may just be that I had no pre-existing expectation for it. I was like, the message, which one's that? And then I watched the episode, I was like, oh, this, okay, cool. And yeah, I wouldn't put it like way up there, but it's certainly very good. It's very touching. And the fact that they found out they were getting cancelled while making this episode, and that funeral scene was the last thing, was the thing they filmed like almost immediately after finding out that they were cancelled, gives it just this extra layer of poignancy that wouldn't have existed if the show had been ongoing, as you said. So yeah, just my broad strokes of this are that it's very good, and as I said, that pacing is pretty good, considering most weeks we say, and then it feels rushed. I don't think that's the case here. Do you think it's like got any pacing issues?
I thought something that was interesting to me this time, I didn't realize how long it would take for him to wake up. That kind of took me off guard. I had remembered it being a little bit quicker to that point. But, it's not like they're wasting time, like anything like that. But it's really, I guess what's interesting about the episode in terms of the pacing is that it's about Tracy, but it's not really about Tracy.
No.
It's, he's really more just, it's a way of bringing up the war again. It's a way of bringing up demons. It's a way of bringing up also just generally how society treats veterans in general. It's a way of, things like that. So he's really just a vehicle for those ideas, those themes. And in that sense, the episode really delivers.
Yes. He also acts as kind of a cat among the pigeons with Kaylee and Simon. And he just sort of... he's like an outside presence that's come in to cause a little bit of chaos. Not chaos so much as just... these 9 are also used to each other, and then here's an extra person, and it kind of does some things that way. I think the biggest thing of this episode is this Tracy character. So I want to talk about him for a while. So Jonathan Woodward is Tracy Smith, and I think it's a very good performance. I mean, Christina Hendricks gets all the talk, rightfully so, but this is way up there. This is
number 2. This is number 2.
Absolutely. He obviously can't come back because he dies, and you wouldn't want him to. You want to see more about Christina Hendricks, but this character, this sort of turn up, do your job, go away, is excellent, I think.
Yes.
I mean, you said about not earning it.
I think once again, because the show ended the way it did, it's fine that it was just one episode. In a more ideal world where the show gets, one full season at least, or 3 seasons total, something like that, I would like to see, I think what Tracy represents, what he brings up for Zoe and Mal, I think that's something you can kind of end a season on. I think his material is kind of season finale worthy.
Yeah.
Where a death can be a real gut punch for characters in a way that, without having to kill off on the main cast.
Yeah, for sure. So you said what it tells us about Mal and Zoe, and that's kind of the first thing we see here. Is what it does is it lets us see some more flashbacks to the war, where they they do a good job of making a tiny set with 4 actors look like a war zone.
Just well enough. That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Just well enough.
It's cool because you get to see Zoe be a badass when she is frequently just kind of tagging along. When it goes down, she's useful, but seeing her be quite a forceful person who's talking shit to these people who are below her for being shitty, I think that's pretty cool. And then seeing the complete juxtaposition of Mal storming in, guns blazing, after Zoe's been talking about stealth. It says a lot about both of them. I actually... someone linked me to a lengthy takedown piece of Firefly and how it's a horrifically sexist show. And I know we've talked about this a bit, but this was going to an absolute extreme. And when looking at this scene, I kind of think... they have a point here, because Mal looks like an idiot and Zoe looks super capable, and yet he's in charge of her. But
yeah, I always think it's one of those dynamics that feels very true to life in actually a lot of ways. But much like River's food in this episode, it's problematic.
I mean, you see who Mal is in Out of Gas and things like that. He is the guy that will give his life for everyone, so that kind of justifies all of the kind of moments where he seems like a bit of a bumbling idiot or less capable of people who are below him. So, as a big picture, it's fine, but there's a lot of moments like this where it's okay. Funny, though. You get to see more of that. And I wouldn't have wanted them to lean on war flashbacks too frequently, but in a world where it is a multi-season show, I think it would have been interesting to see a few more of these, at different stages in the war, maybe some sort of where they were when they signed up kind of thing. I don't know, but I do think it's interesting going back to it. The very opening scene of the pilot, the true pilot, is one of my most memorable. So this doesn't have quite the same impact, but it is nice to revisit that a bit and remind ourselves of who these people were. I like the kind of... In a similar vein, I like his kind of shock that Zoe is married, saying things like, next you'll be telling me she has emotions, etc.
Also, his reaction, what are you doing with this Bible thumper? I thought that was very...
Yeah.
I thought that was a good little moment. I like that moment a lot.
Indeed. And what are they doing with him? Who is Shepherd Book? But yeah, it's the same kind of vein as... when Zoe meets Wash in that flashback and doesn't like him, and then we cut to them being married, I think that's it's a fun note to keep playing, that Zoe did not seem at all the type to be in the situation she is in, and yet she is, and it fits, and it's lovely. So his big thing is that, I mean, he kind of seems like he's a bit of a, I don't know if he's a coward so much as he doesn't seem desperately in favour of, I don't know, like the way he acts in this flashback scene, he doesn't seem as romantically involved in the outcome as Mal is. And he seems kind of like a guy that he just wants to stay alive, and that's perfectly legitimate as a feeling. But you do kind of get this thing where they go back and forth with him where, how Weasley is he? Like they make it seem very much like he is, and then they try and redeem him a little bit. And is he just thinking ill of others and sort of like overthinking it? I don't know. It's difficult, but like Mal says it, like how a lot of this situation he got himself into, and he is now attempting to run away from it. But yeah, it's all very tricky. What was your just sort of read on this character, like who he is?
I think he was an impressionable kid during the war who probably saw a slightly different version of Mal and Zoe than we ever got to know. And he's what happened when there was nothing to come home to, when there was no guidance, there was no role models everywhere. And he basically never grew up in a lot of ways. This is the logical conclusion to a character who had nothing to be responsible for, so he didn't turn out to be all that responsible.
Yeah. Because he says his very touching sort of lines about how he couldn't get his life right after the war. And Mal looks at him incredibly sort of empathetically when he says all this, because, I mean, Mal is clearly broken after the war, and like, to an extent his life is decent enough given the circumstances, but he's always holding back, or there's always a piece of him missing since the war. And whereas this kid, Mal has made something of it, if it is a slightly broken life. This kid is weaving a tale of just like there's nowhere for him after the war. And like, I guess what I was asking before was kind of like the way you said it. I can kind of imagine like he enthusiastically signed up, but then once he saw what the war was actually like, it's like, oh god, I want no part of this, but I also don't want to just run away.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very nuanced character. I think we're not meant to entirely understand him just based on this one glimpse into his life and his psyche, and it's obviously you kind of get the sense that you don't truly know him all that well just based on what. Like this is not him at his best,
no,
to say the least.
And a lot of it we're asked to react to him based on how Mal and Zoe do, I guess, and then also Kaylee. Later, but we'll get to Kaylee and Simon. I just want to talk about Tracy some more first. When Mal shoots him, and like this dude has lied to them. He admits freely he manipulated them. That he knew that Mal and Zoe would respond to that kind of sob story he'd partially invented, maybe embellished a little bit, put some real thought into it. And, he takes Kaylee hostage, and he's lied to them, and he's running away from a situation he signed himself up for. And, he's putting them in immense danger because they're hiding out. It's a dangerous situation, and this dude acts like a villain for a minute. And then once Mal has shot him, and then he starts crying as they're sort of all talking to him as he's dying, you just get this real sense of betrayal from Mal, where, like, all of his men are his men, and he would die for any of them. And he would have he would have helped Tracy if Tracy had just come to him and said, "Hey, can you help me?" And it's that you feel that the captain in him, the former. What was his rank? Was he Captain Reynolds in the war as well? Or
no, Sergeant.
Sergeant. I think
it was Sergeant.
Okay. You see that in him, and it's so heartbreaking. This little moment of you didn't have to do this. I think that makes it a logical ending. The point we come to, stemming from that.
Yes. On that note, though, I think Shepard and Mal were being very needlessly coy and cryptic in that scene where they were coming up with their plan.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was any logical reason to be that cryptic about it, and it would have been very easy to explain to Tracy what they were actually going to do.
Well, wasn't he kind of... They'd, like, locked him off somewhere so he didn't...
No, Tracy walked in just as they were talking about it.
Yeah, but, like, they were deliberately not... They made him go off with Kaylee so that, like, they didn't... the other ship didn't, like, hear him over the intercom.
I know, but they were... The guy wasn't on the intercom with them, or they could have explained it to him off it. I mean, like, Tracy... Like, I think that was very labored and forced, and all that was...
Well, would he have believed them, you know? Like, I don't know. You get the sense this dude has kind of... You know, it's been bad times since the war.
I think that's a worthy question, but I think it's a question that deserves to be answered.
Sure, absolutely. There are no perfect episodes. Yeah, you're right. And, I don't know, I love just this idea that, I don't even know if there's a term for it, but sort of the tragic irony of it, that they would have saved him. Like, they would have found a way, even though he lied, even though he did that, this and that, even though he pulled a gun on Kaylee. Well, I don't know how Mal would have felt about that, but... And that's how it turns out, that, like, this dude is shitty and openly shitty and, like, in his dying words, like, says these things about them. And then they decide to honour his original wish and they take him back to his family. And, like, there's this really beautiful funeral scene where they, you know, 'cause the audio recording they found on him, it's well written in the first place. Like it's not too hammy. It's got some realism to it, and you're just like, yeah, that's good. But then hearing that same exact dialogue played back over the end after what's happened, and it all taking on kind of a second meaning, or, you know, finding new truth, as it were. That's such a great moment. It carries so much weight, and, you know, knowing that this is what they shot after finding out that they were cancelled, making it a kind of funeral for the show in a way. Just such a good ending, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's like Tracy, the A story with Tracy. The big B plot here. There's more to get into, but just sort of the secondary plot here. Kaylee and Simon. So we start out with them having a sort of cute moment in this carnival-esque booth with a cow embryo or whatever, and Simon ruining it as he always does by not knowing how to talk to girls. He says something like she's the only girl on the ship, so she's basically his only option or whatever. And quite rightly, she's not thrilled to hear this.
I think it was a perfectly rational reaction from Kaylee. I think it also was just like, clearly that is not what he intended to say. Like, mean. I think that could have been easily just like not I'm going to forget about you for the next 40 minutes and flirt with weird tomb boy, or coffin boy, I should say. Yes. Like, I thought that was a bit of a stretch. She
becomes more, like, sensitive to a version of who he is. You know, when he's talking medically about Tracy's body and everything, like, you know, examining him or cutting him open or whatever, and she's very, like, taking the stance that he's being unemotional or detached or whatever. It's similar to what happened in Safe. Yeah, Safe, where he unintentionally insulted her, and then she became much more sort of in tune to the other things he says and does that are potentially insulting. But I also find that opening scene interesting because it's the most casual you ever see Simon dressed. Like, for the first... I don't know if he ever really wore anything other than that kind of white shirt and waistcoat kind of combo, you know, his doctor's outfit, as it were. And to see him in this sort of sweater, as your people would say, it's interesting. Like, he's smiling more, he's more sort of engaged, and it kind of feels like a natural progression from what's been happening with... I mean, River hasn't so much been getting... I mean, she's getting slightly better after Ariel, and just him having his little moment with Kaylee where they outright admitted they liked each other, etc. So that felt like a step in the right direction, but again, they are kind of... This also did feel like, oh shit, we need to, like, delay this a bit more, throw a complication in, and then enter Tracy.
Yeah.
So they have that little love triangle, and I don't know, it is interesting in a way, like, seeing this person who's never met Kaylee before come in and be immediately taken with her, when Simon, while it's clear he likes her always, she's never his first thought, because his first thought is River, obviously. And I don't know, it's just nice, because she is the character that she's painted as is kind of the unappreciated one, in some ways, and to see someone come in and just immediately react so positively to her, it's nice for her, I guess. And then at the end, obviously, Simon and Kaylee, they hold hands at this little funeral, etc. I think if they were going to go down this route, they should have in some ways had Simon witness anything between Tracy and Kaylee, because he's kind of always off. He disappears off camera for a while. And it's like Kaylee has this little, oh, here's another guy. And while it is a very sort of rote plot element to have Simon look on jealously, it kind of feels like if you're going to do this, do it in a way. But I may just be, I don't know. I mean, I already think the pacing here is good, so that would have added extra time. I wouldn't have wanted to take anything out to add that in.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, if you're going to do it. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, I didn't need them to do it, so.
Yeah, true. All right, Jane. Jane gets a hat. Jane gets a wonderful, wonderful knitted hat. And continuity for our podcast, we get proof Jane can read. He does read like a child reading for the first time. Or not the first time, but you know. But he can in fact read, so that mystery is solved forever. And he's wearing a lovely fan favourite hat that Lord knows how many people have made or bought replicas of in their search to be the greatest fans of Firefly in the world. Turns out it's us because we host a podcast on it. There's probably other podcasts, so maybe we're not. Anyway, Mike, the most important opinion you're ever going to give on this show. What do you think of Jane's hat?
I think it's very cunning.
Well done. Yeah, Jane, it's not like he's a huge focal point of this episode, but I can't help but notice on this rewatch that Jane has more. They've sort of written more stuff for Jane, and Adam Baldwin's done more with less than I ever noticed, and I can't now help but notice all these little touches. So, like, he continues to not react well to death. Like we saw in Bushwhacked, he's incredibly freaked out by corpses and everything. We saw in Janestown, like when that kid died for him, he did not know how to react to it. He's always incredibly concerned when people are dying, etc. And then when, you know, we see it here, like with that, when we think Tracy is dead, he's not, you know, he's reacting a bit odd. And like he talks through with Book the reason why he is doing what he does, where he, you know, he's like working out and trying to be really active, and he says how he wants to feel the most. I think Book sort of analyzes him as saying, you know, you want to feel like the most alive when you're around death. But I think it is an interesting touch. I think that Jane does seem to have some kind of a thing about death and not quite being able to process it.
Yes, I agree.
However, he because he's Jane, in the same way that he like peers in to look at Mal's severed ear in War Stories, he's very enthusiastic about the notion of Simon cutting Tracy up. And then when Tracy like comes to, he does literally nothing to help anyone, which I think is quite a funny Jane moment. But enough about Jane. Just a few little extra things to address here that didn't really fit in with his stuff. I think Womack is a decent kind of villain of the week. He's not stellar, but there are some pretty...
definitely not stellar.
There's some pretty bad one-off appearances in this show, and I think he's not a bad one.
Better than the constable or whatever the fuck from Jamestown.
Yeah.
He's better than the douchebag from the next episode.
Yeah. Is he better than the guy that just lets Mal go after he saves him?
God, I can't even... Oh, sure, no. I'd say no.
No? Okay. I just thought, you know, he was quite menacing, like, you know, the whole, like, light him on fire thing. He had a bit of an edge to him.
Yeah.
Because there's so many, like, bumbling members of the Alliance, etc., or hammy, like, yokels, as it were, and this dude just seems like he's a little bit more of a badass, even though he is ultimately, like, beaten in the easiest way possible. But for a while, it looked like he was going to be something a little bit edgier.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. You know, I think he's a little over the top in his ridiculous evilness. Like, he's just a complete fucking asshole. Like, come on.
I wasn't initially sure what he was supposed to be. Like, is he a member of the Alliance? They call him a Fed, which I guess is the Alliance, but he again seems to be one of these... It seems like there's so many, like, levels of rank in the Alliance that some of them don't sort of fit the overall archetype.
Yeah. I think, you know, he's just a certain... He's a cop, and it's like America has a million different police, like the FBI, state police, county police, state, local police, state, all that shit. So I can kind of see that. I can kind of see that where he's just one of many different layers of enforcement.
So speaking of him, we get our sort of weekly Book big moment, or sort of big sort of tease at what he is. Book goes toe to toe with Womack, and just his whole knowledge of this entire situation, and like his ability to suss out Womack and his sort of true sitch and motivations, and how he fearlessly just steps into the middle of the room to confront him. You could say, oh, it's just because he's so sure of his, as a religious person, he fears not these people and thinks well of them. But realistically, I think it's yet more evidence of what Book used to be, and his sort of coming up with plans when they're sort of down in the ice or the snow.
I really like Book at the end there. I thought that was a really great blow off or payoff to what was kind of a really dangling C plot in this episode. And once again, it's just another tease of Book that makes you want more Book front and center.
It does.
We will never get.
No. Are we going to be able to read some of these Book side projects by next week? We'll find out.
Spoilers, no.
Yeah, spoilers, probably not, guys. Sorry. All right, so Wash. I really like his reaction to Tracy being alive on the bridge, like literally like losing his shit when Tracy walks onto the bridge. Because
that seems to be his role in a lot of episodes, like just the general like human reaction to something completely absurd happening in the show. That's where they go to Wash.
Yeah. Just he's always off camera because he's flying the ship. So whenever something's revealed, he doesn't know, and it's just genuinely really funny. So because you can put yourself in his shoes, like a dead man walks onto the bridge, you lose your mind. And actually, this came up. Joss and Tim Minear was sort of talking to Alan Tudyk about like how he was playing the character in this episode, how they wanted Wash from the get-go to be just a very calm pilot who's just good at his job. In the middle of very tense situations, he's kind of calm, and how they deliberately changed his reactions once they knew they were getting cancelled, and they were just like, just make him human, make him funny, get a bit more manic.
I watched this episode with the commentary, and just to slightly amend what you're saying.
Okay.
Tim Minear directed this episode, I believe, and him and Alan were just like, whatever, just go for it. Like, there's nothing left to lose at this point. And apparently one day, like, Joss came in and was watching the dailies and just went, so that thing about Wash always being calm in the face of a tough flying thing, that's just gone now, huh?
Yeah.
They're like, yep.
Yep, we're going for funny. Yeah, and sort of final tidbit, I guess, unless you have anything else to say about the episode. This actually, the whole crux of the episode came from they acquired some footage of like a snowy ice planet, and then were trying to think what they could do around that. So that's where the ideas for episodes come from, people. Just little things like that. Have you got any final thoughts on the message? We've already kind of talked about our feelings about where it sits in the rankings, but just anything else you want to talk about?
It's a nice little episode. It's not the home run that I quite remembered. It didn't punch me in the gut quite like it did originally, but I think that's because I probably, when I first saw this show, not a decade ago, but 7 or 8 years ago, I think I probably had a little bit more sympathy for characters like Tracy. Like I think they're a very romanticized kind of character in American pop culture, and now I'm kind of just like, you know what, like grow up, like just like stop being a fuck up. I find fuck ups very uninteresting in general in television. Not to say that they're not tragic, especially in real life. Yeah, and I certainly have enough fuck ups in my family, but I don't find them to be a particularly engaging subject for film and television, especially television where they become a recurring character.
They have. Speaking as a fuck up, I still kind of identify with them a bit, but they are becoming very overexposed. So, the message didn't give you the gut punch you remember. Heart of Gold, however, will give you the kick in the shins that you hoped it would not. Because what a shitty fucking episode this is.
It is almost remarkable how shitty this episode is, and to me, I'll pose a question to you that I essentially posed at the end of last episode and beginning of this episode. Is there anything redeeming about this episode?
Some of it's well acted.
By whom?
Monica Baccarin, Morena Baccarin even, because that's a real person as opposed to the thing I just said. I think she does a good job.
Yes, okay. I would say this episode's pretty much a disaster from beginning to end. I mean, like, there's a few good one-liners, obviously. Like, a Firefly episode would never be able to go without a few good one-liners. But the acting almost across the board is way hammier than usual. The dialogue kind of seemed to get away from them a little bit in terms of just how not normal they were speaking at times. I thought Miranda Burke barely came across like a human being, and you know, she's kind of the pivotal guest star in this episode. She's kind of one of the pivotal characters in this episode. Like,
do you mean Melinda Clarke?
Melinda Clarke, not Miranda Burke. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm nearly positive Miranda Burke is an actress, though.
Probably.
Yes, Melinda Clarke. You know, I don't know her as an actress that well, so it's not to say she's a bad actress. It's more just I thought this performance was just very theatrical, very
you would expect
playing
a bit
to the last
more
row
from it based on
what
you would expect a bit more from it in a way. It kind of seems like I don't know that the way they would build this episode around her in a lot of ways, in the way that they did with Christina Hendricks, in the way that they did with Jonathan Woodward. It's like it's not that she's bad. It's just you kind of feel that I don't know. It sort of seems like something was missing there.
There's a sing-song delivery to almost everything she says that feels very phony to me. That I think you need a certain tone, a certain kind of show, or a certain kind of movie for it to work, and I don't think Firefly is that.
She's being very like Girl on a Ranch, like, you know.
Maybe.
Trying to be like, yeehaw. It's like,
yeah.
Don't know, guys. Don't know.
I think the weekly villain is horrendously two-dimensional.
Yes.
Weird
fucking dude.
Just really nothing enjoyable. Too cartoonish to be even loathsome, like laughably cartoonish. You know, none of the other supporting characters really get to do all that much. In terms of the supporting cast, I guess I think I liked the conversation Wash and Zoe had about having children together.
Yeah, it was a bombshell.
I thought that was very human, very emotional, very true to life about what a couple. I mean, that's a very true life conversation many couples have, regardless of whether or not their occupation is thievery.
Well, you wonder if, like, you know, when we were doing War Stories and I mentioned how it kind of seemed like out of nowhere they're talking about these problems that we've seen no evidence of, you wonder if this is sort of what it was about. Maybe they've been fighting about children off camera.
And it sounds like this was a conversation they've had before many times, that definitely adds up.
And it would make sense they wouldn't want to do that in front of the crew because like they don't want to know any of that. So it kind of justifies after the fact in a way.
But no one else really in this episode gets to do anything of great significance. Jane just gets to be a really cartoonish pig. Mm-hmm. Shepard has a few decent lines, shoots someone with a hose. I don't think it was intentional, but when I rewatched it, I was just like, are they trying to make Wash and Kaylee like a thing?
I know, right?
I don't think it was intentional, but I think if this was your only episode of Firefly that you watched, you would be wondering if there was some sexual tension there or something there.
I wonder if maybe like Kaylee is asking him because he is kind of the safest person to have a conversation like that with because it's so farcical that she's willing to say it in a way.
Yes, but they also they have more scenes together in the episode.
They do. I mean, they are the mechanical too, as it were.
I think they have to be together in a certain senses that they're not fighters. Their job is technically oriented, so they're always going to be paired off at certain points. But I don't know, just the way they did this episode with them was very odd.
It was.
I'm not saying it's something anyone should be reading into. I think it's just like it's there and it kind of needs to be acknowledged, regardless of the fact of how intentional it was. Which again, I don't think it was. I just kind of think it was poorly edited, or
kind of not,
or someone wasn't thinking about that when they shot or filmed or edited this episode or something.
Yeah.
But so that was weird. Simon and River don't really get to do much, and the whole episode kind of is basically this big development in the Inara Mal relationship, and I don't know how I feel about this development.
I don't either. It kind of seems like, in some ways, it's like Mal gets to get some because the male character has to have a bone thrown to... Oh, that's poor choice of words. He has to get a win, and she's left to cry, and it's like... Obviously, there's no shame in crying, but... I don't know, it just feels a bit like he gets to win and she has to lose, in a way. And that's not... Those aren't terms that you want to be using, obviously, but I'm just trying to, like, in broad strokes, sum this up. It kind of feels like it's gone Mal's way, in a way.
Yes. I think maybe if there's a silver lining, is that, as you said, Morena Baccarin really acts the hell out of the reaction they write for her.
Yeah.
Which is that this is something... factually, objectively, she should not care about. You know, she defines herself in a lot of ways by being this very sex-positive person. And when you kind of, something causes you to doubt something you know about yourself to be true, like, that is a very scary thing for anyone to encounter, to deal with, to confront. So I thought her reaction to the situation they constructed was very fitting and very powerfully done.
Yeah.
I just question this being the decision they go in.
Yeah, and it becomes a lot worse because then you get this situation where Nandi gets, like, fridged is the term, I guess, where she has to die because otherwise this remains too complicated, you know? Like,
yes.
She has her love scene and then she dies because otherwise she's in the way of further developments between Mal and Anara. And that's troublesome. Like...
Yeah, it's not great. No. And it's basically all this episode had. And I don't see how anyone watches any of that and feels good coming out of it, or feels like that was a productive use of time.
Yeah. They try and do some more stuff with Anara and, like, hinting more at her past, because Nandi is a character that knew her before any of us did and the crew did. And we get this idea that Nandi points out that she was in a very good position and she was sort of set up to be, I think they call it the house priestess. And it was a great shock to everyone when she left. So, I mean, we've had this sort of hinted at time and time again where she's running from something and it's not clear what, because she's not sort of actively sad at any time, but she also is a little bit melancholy at times. And, you know, we've had sort of the bits of trivia here and there, and did you knows that, you know, Anara potentially had a terminal illness or something. We will never know for sure. I don't know if Joss Whedon has said on the record, this is what was going to happen here, there, and wherever. But in a world where this is an ongoing show and we're just watching the content as it is, it's kind of interesting to play that card. And she also... Nandi also says how Anara and Mal are more alike than they realise. And, you know, Mal thinks of himself and Anara as, like, complete polar opposites. So that's, you know, seeing a character that knows Anara in a way that none of the others do, and can, you know, because of her training, as it were, she can read Mal quite quickly. So she not only knows how they feel about each other, or she knows how Mal feels about Anara, and then the revelation of, you didn't tell me that, you know, she loves you back, basically. And, you know, you get Mal being a dumb man that doesn't understand anything. So that stuff, I guess, a little bit, but when everything around it is so terrible and that's only, like, okay, it's kind of like, well, you don't really get a free pass just because you vaguely wrote a story beat. I do like, though, at the end of the episode that they're about to have this really, like, honest moment with each other as a kind of, we've survived something, you know, like, people died, we could have died, we beat seemingly unbeatable odds, and just, you know, Mal's armed with this information that Anara potentially likes him back and all this, and they're finally gonna tell each other how they feel, only for Anara to get in there first and say, I'm leaving. And she talks about the bond of a family and how people get tied to that. And it does play into, as I said, this idea that she's running from something that her plan was these people, she would have no connection to these people. And that's the whole point of why she picked, like, a group of smugglers or whatever, because that's a million miles away from her. She'll never bond with them. She'll think they're reprehensible. And then it turns out that not only does she love all these people, she particularly loves Mal. So she's in her quest that goes unfinished to run away and not form bonds because she's potentially dying, who knows. that she's finally been confronted with that, and like the extent of her feelings is revealed in the sort of, you know, bawling her eyes out on the floor after finding out about Mal and Nandi. So I do like that moment. I like the way it's played. I like the kind of almost so near yet so far kind of thing. And Miranda Baccarin was talking about how when she had conversations with Joss when reading this script about, like, am I off the show? Like, am I leaving? Like, am I actually leaving? And she was told that they would do some stuff with her, like, at the sort of companion training house, and that's became her scene in Serenity. But there was a plan with her sort of away from the ship, but still on the show for a while. But who knows how that would have turned out? How do you feel about that kind of that final moment where she says she's leaving?
I thought it was powerfully executed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the biggest problem with this show is just how much it revolves around Mal.
Yeah.
And how much, I think, at least, like, I don't know if winning or coming out on top is the right word, but it's more like, if the show is so determined to be centered around Mal, even when he loses, he wins, in the sense that the focus will still be on him. They'll still see it from his perspective the majority of the time. And the show will still kind of, again, whether intentionally or not, cater to giving him the benefit of the doubt. Because we really, like I said, it was kind of, we talked about last episode, but, you know, the majority of the show is about Mal and his reaction to this world around him that he's created. So it's, you know, it's a little...
These people are kind of defined by being his crew, right?
It's not great. It's not great.
It's not. I mean, I don't want to go into too much depth about the stuff that sucks, because it's, like, most of it. I mean, one of the biggest things is, like, how little there is for a lot of the characters to do, how some of them don't seem to be ringing true in the moments they do get. There's not a huge opportunity for a lot of them to shine. This character of Rance, just so weird. Like, he's gotten one of these, to be factually accurate, prostitutes pregnant. He's married. His wife supports him wanting to go get this baby for some reason. And, you know, they have to sort of fight him off or whatever. And, like, the notion of these people holed up in a sort of Western scenario where there's gunslingers coming for them and can they survive, that sounds way more fun than this is. And just that character is so weird. Like, he's got this sort of cult leader aspect to him in some ways, where all these people blindly follow him, and, you know, he's attending weird puppet shows about the history of Earth that are happening in the background that are, you know, I'd rather hear about that than see this episode. It's just, it just sucks. It just sucks. And, like, that certain people have to die, and, you know, the firefight is almost anticlimactic as well, and I don't know, the whole thing, it's a shitty episode. It just is. Although it is rated higher than safe, according to IMDb, and I don't know how I feel about that. Safe certainly is not a good episode.
I feel like that's just misguided Zac Efron hate. Like, that can't be for any other rational reason.
No, none whatsoever.
Safe's in the bottom half, clearly, but it's like, it's clearly a perfectly adequate episode of Firefly.
Yeah, that's the insulting thing we're saying about it. It's perfectly adequate.
One where I would say Heart of Gold is the only episode I would actually say, skip, you'll enjoy the show more without having seen this episode.
Yeah, because Anara doesn't actually end up leaving. So, well, she does, but you could have shoehorned that in some other way. I find it interesting. I find it frustrating, I should say. This episode was originally pitched as a Reaver episode, and Joss nixed it because he thought they'd been overexposed already by being in the pilot that didn't air straight away, and then never physically appearing in Bushwhacked. And then obviously he had big plans for them going forward. But to go from what could have been a first appearance of the Reavers type situation to this is such a slap in the face. Like, what?
Although from the all's well that's end well category, saving the Reavers for the movie was a blessing. It's a very serendipitous event.
Although if you're us and you saw the Reavers before you knew that they were saving them, it kind of ruins that a bit. But we're trying to be objective here and follow through.
Wait, what? If you knew what?
If you knew what you saw the Reavers before you knew. You saw the movie first, so you saw the Reavers, and you didn't know they were a thing that was being saved.
Oh, yes,
saved for later. I mean, but we're trying to be from the point of view of how this
but,
was...
And also, I guarantee you whatever TV shoestring budget they would have had to make the reavers in this episode would not have been as
Indeed.
cosmetically as impressive as they were in the movie.
Indeed.
To the extent that they were, I actually really don't remember.
Yeah. Okay, so clearly the worst episode. Clearly. Probably too highly rated on IMDb, to be honest. That's probably just people just trying to be loyal to the show and say, no, it's all good. Yeah, the message is very good. Maybe not as good as Mike remembers it. I think it's very good. I wouldn't put it in top 3. Heart of Gold sucks. We've only got 2 episodes left, Mike.
No, we only got 2 episodes of our podcast left, but there's only 1 episode of TV.
One
left.
episode of the TV, yeah. So next week will be Objects in Space, which...
The special features on the DVD will also be covered. I don't know about what Matt's doing with the Blu-ray. And definitely the first book that I'm pulling up now, hence the scrambling in the background, Serenity, Firefly Class 03K64, Those Left Behind. I will read it by the recording of the next episode.
Yes, I'm going to try and read some more of that huge book I have. It's got a load of stuff about book. I wonder if some of that is the comic material. I don't know. That exists. We should attempt to read it. We're probably not going to. We'll also be talking about just sort of, because that will be the end of the show before the movie. So we're going to do just a general roundup and all of that. And then the week after that, it will be Serenity, not to be confused for the pilot, but instead the movie.
We'll have a special guest that we will not reveal until that episode.
It's a good thing you said that. I was about to say who it was.
Yes. And then just, we're in the home stretch. Unlike, as we said, with X-Men and Batman, there's not infinite possibilities for the future. This is it.
Yeah, we can't even forget to do Return of the Caped Crusaders. There's no equivalent here. We're out of stuff.
And we're too lazy to read the books.
Yeah, that's true. So from the worst episode to what Matt remembers as his favourite episode, next week. Look forward to it. Until then, Mike and Matt on SoundCloud, intotherealworld.com, futurama.net. Thank you for listening, everybody. We will see you next week. Russell, scramble, crash.
There's no place I can be since I found serenity. But you can't take the sky from me.